What's up, everyone? We are back with another True Detective Season 4 deep dive, this time for the season finale. We'll do a quick section at the end giving our opinions on the season as a whole, so if you want to skip to that section, I've included it in the timestamps. Otherwise, let's get going with this deep dive. We'll divide it up into two main sections. The main plot, which is Danvers and Navarro figuring out what the fuck is actually going on, and then the second section will cover Pete's experience dumping the bodies of his dad with Rose. No time to waste, let's get going. So it's still the 14th day of night, New Year's Eve, and Danvers and Navarro are breaking into night country. Things go bad when Navarro freelances and falls through the ice into a deeper tunnel. Danvers ends up falling in as well. Both of them end up being okay, and out of nowhere, Raymond Clark pokes his head out, and soon the chase is on. They follow Clark and discover this little laboratory in the caves. We see various instruments, ice cores, and even a neat little spiral symbol on the ceiling. Nice. Danvers also finds the star-shaped rod that looks to be the weapon used to stab Annie K. They check behind the ice cores and find a ladder leading up to none other than Tsalal Station.
It's a random thought, but as soon as they saw Clark, I had an image pop in my head of one of those wild Pokemon screens where it's like, bam, a wild Raymond Clark appears.
Who's that Pokemon? It's Clark!
Yeah, and speaking of Tsalal, Twist and Shout is once again playing in the background, so Danvers goes back into rage mode and destroys the TV set. I have no idea why this keeps looping on the TV. I thought Danvers destroyed it in episode 1. You mean to tell me that Raymond Clark has been hiding out here at Tsalal and the entire time he's like, you know what, I gotta fucking rewatch that Ferris Bueller scene again? Makes absolutely zero sense to me.
This is probably a hint that we've gone the supernatural hallucination route. Most of the season has revolved around feelings of grief and isolation, so Danvers seeing this and freaking out here could be triggered by her Holden memories. Similar to Navarro seeing Lund possessed, Danvers is the only one who sees this, so there's a possibility that it's all in her head.
Anyways, after destroying the TV box, Danvers continues to look for Clark. She ends up going back into the room they originally came through, but makes a rookie mistake and goes into the freezer section. I don't know what this is called, so I'm just going to call it a freezer. Clark ambushes her by locking her in the freezer. Smart man. Navarro hears the commotion and goes to investigate, but Clark ambushes her with a fire extinguisher blow to the head, knocking her the fuck out. I gotta say, so far, Clark is way more lethal than either of these two detectives.
They're held back by the Batman rule, trying to deliver justice without killing anyone. Well, except this guy. Clark is out here looking deranged as hell, not a man with anything to lose, and while he lacks the straight-line speed of Errol Childress, our scouts say he's lanky, crafty, and not afraid to do the dirty work.
Danvers ends up ripping off a steel rod and using it to break the glass. My first inclination would have been to shoot the glass from an angle to avoid the bullet ricocheting back at me, but hey, credit to Danvers for finding a solution. As Navarro is getting dragged by Clark, she wakes up and just beats the shit out of him. Danvers arrives in time to stop Navarro from murdering him, which is good because Clark is obviously a key witness. So they then tie Clark to the chair and start interrogating him. Well, not really. What actually happens is Navarro asks him if he loved Annie K, and when Clark says yes, Navarro immediately resorts to torture.
Did you actually love Annie?
Yes.
She puts headphones in his ears and ties them with duct tape to force him to listen to the Annie K murder video on loop. This part made no sense to me. I get that he first said I'm not talking to you, but it's not like they actually tried asking any questions. Outside of did you love Annie K, what questions did they ask again? None. They just went right into torture, which is pretty interesting. So Danvers and Navarro then take a coffee break while Clark is listening to the video on loop.
Part of this is a detective technique, and part of it is probably driven by the subconscious, maybe conscious at times, desire of the two detectives to see somebody pay dearly who is responsible for what happened to Annie K.
So while Danvers and Navarro are on a coffee break, we see another orange appear when Navarro opens the fridge. They share some Funyuns and then get back to interrogating Clark. He says that the scientists were digging for the DNA of a microorganism contained in the permafrost. As Adam Bryce had mentioned previously, this microorganism had the potential to cure all types of diseases and save the world. Now, Bryce had said extracting this microorganism would damage it, but the pollution from the mine actually helped soften the permafrost so that the scientists could extract the microorganism with much less damage and faster.
No, we were pushing the mine to produce more pollutants.
It's odd that the only way to manipulate the permafrost is a very specific kind of pollution put out by the nearby mine, but it is an interesting way to connect the full thematic loop here. The team of Tsalal and the mine represents the long-standing hyperfixation of America on industrialization and warped utilitarianism at the hands of greater progress, or something like that.
It could have changed the world. It still could.
The main cost being indigenous lives here, which are valued less by the powers that be in this situation and reflects the injustice occurring. Here's where we get a nice connection back to Blood Meridian, that book that we saw in episode 1. In this text, the slaughtering of indigenous peoples is done for profit and reward in some way, which definitely connects to what we're seeing here on a tangential level, even if it's not as in your face.
So how did Annie K get involved in all of this? Well, she started to piece together everything that was going on through Clark's notes, and one night she snuck into Tsalal without Clark realizing. She was trying to find a paper trail that the mine was paying them, but ended up finding a darker truth. She then started to destroy the scientists' work. Anders Lund, head of the Tsalal research team, caught her and just lost his mind and started stabbing her to death with the star-shaped object. Clark came in and pulled Lund off, but Annie hit Clark with a metal pipe object. With Clark knocked down, the rest of the scientists stormed in and held Annie down and stabbed her to death. Well, actually not quite to death, because as Clark goes to check on her, she wakes up. Clark then suffocates her to death while the rest of the scientists watch in horror. As the viewers, we see the truth through the flashbacks, but Clark obviously tells Danvers and Navarro that the other scientists were the ones who killed her and that he can never hurt her.
Bit surprising to see the scientists go on full murderous rampage mode. Annie knew too much, but we can also assume that Oliver Tagaq did too, and as far as we know, he is missing, but probably on his own accord. It seems like it would be much harder to keep Annie quiet on this one, so I do get it. Being an activist and somebody well connected to the community and protest demonstrations, Clark knew it was inevitable, so he tries to give her the least painful exit possible, but the idea that he misrepresents this rather than comes clean is pretty fucked. Does he not want to admit it out loud due to the lingering shame, or does he just not want to get annihilated by Navarro again? I've gotten plenty wrong about this season, but I'm going to go ahead and take a little victory lap on this one, caused by the lab instrument, just like I drew it up. It's not the first time we've seen this Carcosa-associated shape mentioned in the True Detective universe. Maybe it was a more intentional weapon, or it could have been some kind of lab equipment used for readings.
So we learned that Annie K cost the scientists 2 years of work. When Navarro mentions to Clark that they cut out Annie K's tongue, Clark seems genuinely surprised and says it wasn't them who did that. He says that they called the mine for help since the mine still needed the scientists to cover up their pollution numbers, and the mine sent Hank over to move the body. Hank was most likely the man who cut out her tongue. With this confession, Navarro is about to shoot Clark in the head but changes her mind. We also get a flashback at this moment to the Wheeler case, and we see that Navarro was the one who actually shot Wheeler. Danvers does admit that she was about to shoot Wheeler herself, but Navarro beat her to it. Also, when they shot Wheeler, we hear a baby's cries in the other room, so I guess Wheeler had a young child as well.
And this moment symbolizes a little bit of growth here from our lead detectives. Both deal with trauma and the pains of the past, but they've developed enough of a coping mechanism or a filter to their actions to not make the same mistake the second time around.
They go back to Clark and ask him what happened to the rest of the scientists. He says he kept seeing the ghost of Annie K and hearing her voice. On the night that all the scientists were killed, Clark had a freak out and ran into the underground tunnel. He did this just in the nick of time because as soon as he shut the hatch door, we hear the blood-curdling screams of Lund and the rest of the scientists. Clark held the latch shut for an hour straight. Someone on the other side tried to open it, but Clark was too damn strong. Clark believes that Annie K's ghost came back and killed the scientists. Clark came up intermittently from the underground tunnels to get food from the lab, and that's who the supply guy saw. We also get this incredible line from Clark.
Time is a flat circle, and we are all stuck in it.
I get that Issa Lopez has been upset at the Season 1 hardcore fanboys, but Jesus Christ, this is one of the cringiest callbacks to Season 1 I've ever seen. This line made me audibly yell, "Fuck you," to my laptop.
I'm not a critic. I am just a guy sitting on his couch watching this like everybody else. It takes a lot of work to produce art, let alone get it distributed by a major media network. This moment embodies a lot of Season 4 for me though. The setting is top notch, the cinematography is excellent, and thematically there are a lot of incredible ideas. The idea that an ancient spirit or being helped carry out revenge for Annie after her unjust death is well worth exploring. However, the execution on dialogue to build these ambitious ideas and the degree of Season 1 tie-ins are probably the weakest components for me. And this is intuitive when you realize that the season is much more mystery horror than previous seasons, but we're going to touch more on that down the road.
Danvers then storms off to take a nap, which is absurd. Probably not the best time to take a nap. Oh, she also finds the cross necklace in her hair. This is the necklace Navarro tossed out of her car. Very weird. Clark begs Navarro to kill him or let him kill himself, which she obliges.
We do see Navarro empathizing a bit with Clark's pain, a possible result of what her sister went through and what she herself struggles with in her own mind.
Danvers then wakes up from her nap to see Navarro standing outside with Clark frozen to death. Their main witness is gone now. Also, the power at Tsalal just went out as well. Navarro finds the emergency generator, but it doesn't work. The two detectives are going to freeze to death if they don't figure something out. At this moment, Navarro has another one of her visions. She sees Clark having a seizure from episode 1, as he then says she's awake. Navarro and Danvers manage to start a fire to keep warm. Navarro starts talking about suicide in a comforting way, which to me is kind of wild. Like, is Issa really glorifying suicide here? I get that suicide is a major issue in the indigenous community, but the way Navarro talks about the comfort that comes with it is insane to me. Suicide isn't good. Am I fucking taking crazy pills?
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
There's gotta be another way to execute this idea. Anyways, thankfully Danvers shares my view and is like, yo, get the fuck out of here with that nonsense.
Yeah, it's always complicated discussing issues like suicide and loss just based on everybody's different lived experience. If we're going to look at Navarro's point of view, her view is that what comes after life on Earth is different from what Danvers believes.
There's so much more than just this.
Being drawn toward the visions and suicide seems like a continuation of what Navarro experienced last episode and what her sister Julia experienced to a great extent. Part of this could be Navarro trying to rationalize her sister's passing and her family past as well. Reese does well to sell her thoughts and state of mind throughout this scene. Solid acting work.
Danvers then leaves to try to take a nap again. It doesn't work, and when she comes back, Navarro is gone. The door to the Tsalal garage is open, and Danvers goes outside to see Navarro walking out onto the ice. Navarro does have a moment where she learns her Nupiaq name. Bear with me because the pronunciation is going to be hard for me, but I think it's Sukanyakkyak. Anyways, Danvers follows her and has her own vision of her son Holden trapped under the ice. She goes to break the ice and falls in. She's about to die when Navarro comes back out of nowhere and saves her. Navarro gets her back near the fire and saves her life. While this is going on, Danvers is having flashbacks to her moments with Holden. Another rendition of Twist and Shout starts to play in the background during this emotional scene. This time it's an a cappella slow version of the song. Twist and shout. Whoever was responsible for the music selection in this season should be put in jail. Not for too long. It doesn't need to be anything intense like Rikers. A club-fed like jail is fine for me. Just a 3-month stint to really think about their actions and to vow to never pick music for a show ever again, because this is fucking insulting.
It was awesome to see Navarro discover her name, and it was powerful to see Danvers also drawn into the idea of walking into the sea, because this frames it as less a conscious choice and more driven by the desire to experience what we've lost in our past. But that does get kind of deflated by the a cappella, I will not lie.
So as Danvers and Navarro try to stay warm, Navarro says something really interesting to Danvers. She references Clark holding the hatch and being in the dark, and she says she's also been feeling that way for a long time, holding the hatch and being terrified of being the one to open it. This inspires Danvers, and she immediately sprints back to the lab room with the hatch. She pours some liquid on the hatch, not sure what it is, but enlighten me if you know. She tells Navarro to grab a nearby UV light, and they shine the light on the hatch, and we see a variety of fingerprints. One set of fingerprints shows 2 missing fingers. We saw these prints on one of the scientist's boots as well. They belong to Blair, the woman who works at the crab factory.
A lot of theories and suspicion earlier in the season about Blair being a culprit due to the original fingerprints from the scene that we saw. Shout out to all of you who were onto this one from the jump.
So this prompts Danvers and Navarro to drive to the neighborhood where the lady who cleaned at Tsalal lives. Her name is Beatrice Malee, and she also worked with Blair at the crab factory. Beatrice lets them in, and we get the full story of what actually went down, so buckle up. All the cleaning ladies know that the scientist killed Annie K, but for 6 years, everyone thought it was the mine who did it. But one day while cleaning the room where the secret hatch is, Beatrice knocks over her mop bucket and notices the water draining through the tiles. This prompts her to look closer, and she discovers the hatch, and then she goes down and recognizes the star-shaped weapon used to kill Annie K. They didn't report the crime to the cops since they don't trust the cops, so instead they took matters into their own hands. The cleaning ladies got together, cut the power to Tsalal, and stormed the Tsalal building with guns. They rounded up all the scientists and put them in a truck. They then drove them out onto the ice, forced them to strip naked, and had them walk out onto the ice. According to Beatrice, they folded their clothes in case any of the men survived and came back. Beatrice doesn't seem to think that the cleaning ladies killed the men. She says that I think she's referring to like Mother Nature, Alaska, or just the spirit of Alaska, or is this Sedna? I don't fucking know, man. Anyways, Beatrice says that she, the greater spirit, was the one who killed the men. I guess this is why Pete's cousin Vinny says that the men died of a heart attack. Maybe some supernatural spirit out on the ice scared them to death. I don't know, man. You know what I think? I think the men froze to death because the cleaning ladies had them walk on the ice butt naked. Like, let's be fucking real, the cleaning ladies murdered them. While Beatrice is telling this story, all the cleaning ladies pull up to the room like some kind of gang. It's fucking hilarious. I was fully expecting a Billie Eilish song to play during the storming of the Tsalal scene. Imagine this. Anyways, Danvers and Navarro basically agree to the cover up and go with the slab avalanche explanation and let the cleaning ladies get away with murder. Navarro asks about who left Annie K's tongue, and Beatrice says it wasn't them. So we don't know who left the tongue. Also, I'm telling you right now, as a man, the worst possible way to be murdered would be naked out on the ice. At least fluff me up a bit and put me in some warm water before showing my body to the public like that.
I like that we touched upon the theme of the indigenous community being mistrustful of cops once again, and they worked in the explanation of how the underground lab was found in a way that flowed pretty well. Definitely was not a coincidence that Navarro crosses back over to the side of her community, especially after it's clear how complicit the cops and the mine were with all this shit. That scene of them storming the lab and then making all the guys strip was wild. Hard to take seriously at moments, but hey, got the job done. The quote-unquote same story, different ending line was basically what this season has been about. We see a sense of justice worked into the idea of revenge on behalf of the indigenous community and more.
Alright, let's talk about Pete's story arc this episode, which is happening while Danvers and Navarro are horseplaying with Raymond Clark at Tsalal. Pete cleans up the bodies real good and wraps them in garbage bags, then packs them into the trunk of his car. After showering and cleaning the blood off of his body, he notices a tooth lodged in the wall, either from his dad or Otis. Right as he's about to get the tooth out, Leah shows up. She's back here to spend New Year's with Danvers. Pretty bad timing, and Pete says Liz is gone for an emergency. Leah is wondering why he's cleaning, and Pete does the smart move of playing the sad card. He says the whole Kayla thing has him messed up, and he wants to drive Leah back to Kayla's house so that she and Darwin aren't spending New Year's Eve alone. This emotional plea is enough to get Leah out of there, and he quickly removes the tooth from the wall as he leaves. Pete drops Leah off, but Kayla sprints to the car and is pissed off. He says he didn't want Leah walking alone in the blizzard, but Kayla knows that he's bullshitting and wants to know what's actually going on. He comes clean and says he did something bad. He can't say what it is, but he's fixing it and he needs Kayla to trust him. He needs to do this one thing and then he'll be with Kayla for good. Kayla gives him a kiss and I guess everything is all good. She tells him to stay safe and calls him an asshole. Once again, a pretty out of nowhere turn of events, but hey, whatever, man. I'm fucking numb at this point.
That's the thing about being a nice guy like Pete. Whenever you have those credentials, you can play that card anytime you want.
Pete then takes the bodies to Rose. Rose is a real G, so no questions asked. She's down to help him dispose of the body. They drag Hank's body out onto the ice and make a hole in it. Rose tells Pete to look away since she's going to have to cut up his lungs so the air escapes and he doesn't float to the surface. Once Hank is cut up, Rose tells Pete that it's his job to put the body in himself, which he does. Petey then drops to the ground and looks mortified at what he's just done. Rose comforts him by telling him the harsh truth. The worst part isn't done, it's just beginning. The mourning phase and trauma of the whole thing will stick with him forever, and it'll be the worst part. Jesus, hell of a bedside manner, Rose. Also, this happens right as the clock hits midnight and it's Jan 1. Happy New Year, Petey.
Whenever you see Rose this season, I love that her energy has basically been this.
I can't tell you what it is, you can never ask me about it later, and we're gonna hurt some people.
Whose car are we gonna take?
The flashback to present with Hank and Pete cutting through the ice for very different reasons is a nice way to hint at the trauma that's to come here. It's not going to be great, it might get worse, but eventually it'll get better.
Alright, let's talk about the aftermath of the investigation. We fast forward to May 12th, and Danvers is giving an interview to an investigative team, probably from Anchorage. She says that Hank Pryor's death is still being investigated, but the body of Otis Heiss was found in his car. Ballistics showed the bullet from Hank's gun matching Heiss's head wound. One of the investigators asked Danvers about her checking Heiss out of the lighthouse on the day of his death. Danvers says that what most likely happened was that Hank picked up Heiss once he and Danvers were separated, he killed Otis, and then he suffered an accident while trying to dispose of the body. The investigators then ask about Navarro, and Danvers gives her answer while we see a montage of what actually happened. I guess Navarro left Kavik his SpongeBob toothbrush, left Holden's stuffed polar bear for Danvers, and then walked out onto the ice with minimal snow protection? Did she kill herself? We do learn that before Clark killed himself, Navarro recorded a video of him confessing to everything that went down. That was probably the deal between Navarro and Clark. If he confessed on video, she let him die on his own accord. I think we also see Silver Sky close down, since in the video, Clark admits that they knowingly put out 11 times the acceptable pollution levels into the water. There's this scene where Danvers is chilling at this spot on the water and Navarro walks out. No idea if that's a vision or real. I'm personally going to choose to believe that Navarro went back down to Boston to hang with all the homies. I'm really choosing to believe that Navarro didn't give up and just kill herself, because that's a horrible fucking message to send. I'm giving Issa and the writing team the benefit of the doubt in this regard. Let me know what y'all think.
That closing sequence felt very season 1 with the opening shot at the camera lens, etc. during the interview process. I believe that the genuine aim of some of the Easter eggs in here were to pay homage to season 1 and to True Detective in general, which is justified, and we appreciate that. HBO hired a talented team to bring this to fruition. Part of the big disconnect that in my opinion occurred was that season 1 fans expected a very different season from what HBO delivered. And the origin of the script was within an entirely different project, and a lot of season 1 elements felt a little shoehorned in. HBO did a sloppy job not conveying proper expectations. That being said, there are some really cool and very worthwhile ideas this season explores, from the struggles of indigenous communities, the plight of women within these communities, and the impact of trauma and grief, and the under-the-radar goings-on in a place like Ennis that teeter the line of spiritual, hey, I just ate too many mushrooms, and well, damn, that can't be a good sign. It was messy at times under a microscope, but sometimes TV can just be enjoyed for what it is, and I think that's the kind of season that this show is. The creator and the entire crew should have been able to put this season out properly under its own mantle, because the aim and the style of the season deserved its own breathing room. To sum it up, there are people who like season 4 the most out of all the seasons and find it an original, well-delivered show. That is completely fine. There are also people who feel season 1's dialogue and character building blew season 4 out of the water and will constantly compare it.
My life's been a circle of violence and degradation, as long as I can remember. I'm ready to tie it off.
This is also fine. They are in the same series. You are going to see people compare House of Dragons Season 2 to previous seasons of Game of Thrones, because that's the nature of the beast. It wasn't my favorite season, but there were some awesome elements that Chen will mention more later on. The scenery and cinematography was top-notch.
Alright, now it's time for my rant about this season. If Damon is good cop, then I, Cheney, am bad cop. This season was absolute dog shit and offensive to the entire franchise. I don't care about the viewership numbers being high, because let's face it, there's nothing else on right now, and we're coming back from a writer's strike. Also, the True Detective franchise is still iconic, and you had Jodie Foster starring in this, so I expect lots of views. First off, Damon and I dropped 2 trailer breakdown videos hyping up this season. We even covered the entirety of season 1 in anticipation of season 4. We've spent countless hours breaking down every episode of this season and chopping up so much B-roll footage that my right wrist is cooked. Simply put, I did not come into this season wanting to hate it. If anything, I was looking for any reason to say it's good, but it gave me so few. Now, before I tear this season apart, let me mention some of the good aspects. The setting was amazing, beautifully shot. Alaska in the long dark winter is a dope setting. The core components of the story were fascinating and downright sinister. Scientists at a nearby research facility being gruesomely murdered? Hell yeah. Local mine polluting the environment in the name of greed and capitalism? Okay, very interesting. Jodie Foster is the main lead? Let's fucking ride. The ingredients for an amazing season were there, and they were squandered by horrendous writing. This show never felt like a detective show because there was no payoff. As a viewer, I never truly felt immersed in the mystery. The discoveries weren't satisfying. I'll use a comparison to season 1 as an example of what payoff really looks like. In season 1, to get to Reggie Ledoux, we had to go through Charlie Lang, Tyrone Weems, Ginger and the Iron Crusaders, then to DeWall, then finally to Reggie. Along the way, there were so many twists and turns. Marty had to tail Tyrone's girlfriend while his home life was in shambles. Russ had to go back undercover and almost die in an epic Project's drug stash raid. That's what you call payoff. The case isn't easily solved. Our detectives got to go through numerous twists and turns. It's messy. They got to bend and sometimes break the rules to find solutions. And when they finally do, it feels so fucking satisfying. Even the initial reveal of Reggie walking outside the cookhouse is 1,000 times more terrifying than these ridiculous jump scares Issa Lopez is putting in. Compare that to this season where Otis Heiss leads us to the ice caves. How did we learn about Heiss? Oh yeah, Pete finds him off screen. And then in that same episode, Heiss is spotted by some fishermen off screen. It doesn't feel rewarding or earned when we finally meet Heiss. I can say the same thing for Raymond Clark as well. Another major complaint I have are the cheap callbacks to season 1. I've heard from many people not to compare the seasons, but that's really tough to do when Issa Lopez is throwing the spiral in our face. And to have a cult symbol relegated to a warning for thin ice, just silly stuff. And if it's just a warning for thin ice, why is Annie K getting it tatted on her? Why is it carved into Clark's trailer ceiling? It's supposed to mean something more. But nope, just a warning for thin ice. This line referencing time is a flat circle was so bad, man. Even if you're a season 4 supporter, you can't defend how corny this line was. How did this make it past the revision and editing process? Who was in the writer's room? Did ChatGPT write this script?
Fantasy football. Oh, Tinder.
Yeah, honestly, ChatGPT might have written this script. Good writing is about showing, not telling. Let's look at another example. In episode 1, when Danvers, Hank, and Pete are first investigating Tsalal, Danvers makes a comment about Hank never being the sandwich-making type.
You were never much of a sandwich-making kind of dad, was he, Pete?
This line is supposed to show that Hank wasn't the best father for Pete, but it's completely unnecessary and cheap. Just moments before, Hank's yelling at Pete to speak up, and Danvers has to defend Pete.
The scientist's last contact was...
Speak up, Peter.
I can hear him just fine.
That moment itself is already enough to show the type of dad that Hank is. There's no need to then follow that up seconds later with a forced line about Hank's lack of sandwich making skills. Issa could have simply deleted the sandwich line because everything else about Hank and his interactions with Pete are enough to illustrate him as a shitty dad. Here's an example of stellar writing. Once again, I'm going to use season 1 as an example because I've seen some people delusional enough to suggest that this season is better than the first. Please give me some of what you're smoking. On second thought, actually don't, because it might kill me. In the first episode of season 1, we see that Rust is an odd guy and Marty is more traditional. Marty's got the kids and the wife. He's been in state CID for 8 years at that point, so his career has been relatively stable and his colleagues seem to like him. As viewers, we can infer that Marty probably grew up in a more traditional white household in the 60s and 70s. We then get confirmation of this in the next episode during a car ride scene with Rust and Marty, where Marty says his mom was a Donna Reed type, packed sandwiches and shit like that.
My mother, Donna Reed type, packed lunches, bedtime stories.
Just the subtle nature of waiting an episode before dropping that line for the viewers makes a huge difference. It feels more natural to us when Marty is talking to Rust. Us viewers have already spent an episode with Marty, so we have a feel for what he's like, and when he gives us background info, it doesn't feel like he's regurgitating his biography at us. Meanwhile, compare this to what Danvers says to Hank within the first 10 minutes of episode 1. The subtleties add up, and that's what elite storytelling is about. Another example of Issa's lack of understanding of good writing also happens in episode 1. In fact, I actually liked episode 1 as a whole, but this one example spooked me so much. It happens when Danvers is telling Pete about the Annie K case.
That a Tinder match or something?
Fantasy football. I got 2 running backs on IR. I got a wide receiver as a klutz.
Now, what might seem like a meaningless piece of dialogue actually represents way more. That was the moment that scared me because I started thinking, oh shit, does Issa Lopez know how people actually talk? True Detective made its name off of amazing dialogue, and when you're making a 6-episode series, that makes every single line so much more important. I don't really know what the purpose of this line is supposed to serve. If it's supposed to characterize Danvers as one of the guys, we can already see that from the opening scenes when she's running the show at Tsalal. We see that in the way that Danvers walks, her mannerisms, how she commands space and commands the room in general. You have a legendary actor in Jodie Foster, just let her cook and get the fuck out of the way. It almost felt like the writer said, we gotta make Danvers seem like a bro. What do bros like? Oh yeah, fantasy football. That's what guys like, right? Yeah, we'll put that line in. Oh, and she's got a Vikings hoodie on while this line is being delivered. This is middle school writing, I swear. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't go off on some of the plot holes during this season. I won't mention all of them because this video is already too long and it'd be triple the length if I discussed all of the plot holes and loose ends. But here are just some of the really stupid ones. First off, the Annie K video from her phone doesn't match what actually happened. That's a serious plot hole, and before people start saying, oh, Clark is an unreliable narrator, the entire season has established that flashback scenes are supposed to be accurate. The writers just didn't proofread this. Another plot hole, who placed the tongue at Tsalal? The cleaning lady murder squadron were pretty honest with Danvers and Navarro, and they say it's not them. Hank moved the body, but there would be no reason for him to put the tongue back there. So was it just a spooky ghost? I guess it was a spooky ghost. What was the purpose of having Lund survive? Oh, and also how does Lund survive after being frozen for 48 hours? But Clark somehow insta-freezes? Anyways, back to Lund. He could have easily just said, hey, the cleaning ladies forced us onto the ice when Danvers is interrogating him. Instead, he says some bullshit about she came for us in the dark. Oh great, I guess it was the spooky ghost again. It would have been a better story if Lund just never survived in the first place. What was the purpose of Oliver Tagak? Like seriously, what purpose did he serve? Is it just so Navarro can find the spiral symbol and then learn from Kavik's friend that it's a thin ice warning so then she can come up with a plan to crack through the ice? Cause that's really dumb. Heist could have probably just told Danvers that himself. Also, Rose already knew what the symbol was and she was purposefully being eerie about it. Another pointless character that didn't need to exist. How did Clark find Otis Heist? All of the openings to the caves have been sealed shut, so I doubt that Heist was just roaming in night country. So did Clark leave the caves / Tsalal to find Heist in the dredges? Also, if Clark thinks that the ghost of Annie K is the one who came after the scientists, why the hell would Heist know how to survive that? Annie K died 6 years ago, Heist suffered his injuries 20 years ago. This shit makes no fucking sense. Another plot hole, how did a mob of cleaning ladies storm into Tsalal and leave no signs of their rampage? No tire tracks from their truck, no boot prints, nothing? I'm gonna lose my mind, so here's the last plot point I'll mention. Danvers and Navarro can't leave Tsalal because of the blizzard, but somehow Pete has no problem driving in the blizzard to go see Rose, and they have no problem disposing of Hank's body. Seems like they could have left Tsalal at any point during the blizzard. Anyways, that does it for my rant section. It's just come out that HBO has renewed True Detective for another season with Issa Lopez as the showrunner. While as a fan, this is very disappointing to me, I can't say I'm surprised. After all the ratings were good and execs only look at numbers, I don't think Issa Lopez is a good enough writer to truly flesh out a compelling detective series. I guess time truly is a flat circle. I'm out.